I am Lucas, a young man who has just moved into an apartment in the heart of New York City. Newly graduated and full of expectations, this move symbolized the beginning of a new phase in my life. Since childhood, I have always been described as a charismatic and determined person. I enjoy meeting new people and places, and this new residence seemed like the perfect opportunity for that. When I entered the apartment for the first time, I felt a mixture of excitement and comfort. The walls were a soft gray, creating a calm and cozy environment. Large windows allowed sunlight to flood the room during the day, bringing a sense of spaciousness and freedom. The minimalist furniture, carefully chosen, gave a modern touch to the space, while the well-equipped kitchen seemed to invite new culinary adventures. Every detail seemed perfect, as if the apartment had been tailor-made for me. The central location was also a bonus, allowing easy access to work and the most vibrant spots in the city. Everything seemed to fit perfectly into this new phase of my life. I was excited and ready to start this journey. The apartment exuded an aura of new beginnings, and I felt at peace there. However, this initial feeling of comfort and security would soon begin to change. Soon after settling into the new apartment, I met Victor, my next-door neighbor. He seemed to be a friendly and helpful person. On our first meeting, he greeted me with a warm smile and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Victor, your neighbor. If you need anything, don't hesitate to knock on my door," he said. Our initial interactions were quite casual. We talked in the hallway about everyday things like the weather, work, and the best places to eat in the area. Victor always had a useful tip or a funny story to tell. Quickly, I began to see him as a potential friend. One evening, after a particularly tiring day at work, Victor invited me for coffee in his apartment. I accepted the offer, and we went to chat in his kitchen, which was as modern and organized as mine. During the conversation, I discovered that we had common interests, like suspense movies and a passion for cooking. He seemed like the kind of person I could trust and count on. Everything indicated that this friendship would be a positive addition to my new life in the city. At least, that's what I thought. The first few nights in the new apartment were quiet, but soon the disturbances began. It was late at night when I first heard a strange noise. They were rhythmic knocks, as if someone was repeatedly hitting the wall. Initially, I thought it was just some plumbing problem, or maybe the neighbors upstairs. But the knocks continued, and always came from the wall that divided my apartment from Victor's. Curious and a little uncomfortable, I decided to investigate. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to identify the origin of the sounds. The knocks were persistent, methodical, and slightly unsettling. Each sound seemed to echo directly into my brain, creating a feeling of anxiety and discomfort. I thought of various logical explanations, maybe some animal trapped in the walls, a pipe problem, or even construction noises. The next morning, I found Victor in the hallway and mentioned the knocks. "Have you heard these strange noises at night?" I asked. He looked at me with an indifferent expression and replied, "No, I haven't heard anything. Maybe it's just your imagination." His answer left me intrigued. How could he not have heard? The knocks were so loud and clear. I decided to let it go, thinking maybe I was overreacting. But the following nights were the same. The knocks continued, and my curiosity turned into a mix of frustration and unease. Each night seemed longer, and the noises more intense. I began to notice that Victor was becoming more distant and strange. Our hallway conversations became rare and brief. He avoided eye contact and always had an excuse to leave quickly. One night, I could no longer ignore the knocks. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to check every corner of the apartment, looking for anything that could explain those sounds. I opened all the cabinets, looked under the furniture, and checked every nook. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The knocks, however, didn't stop. They came directly from the wall that divided my apartment from Victor's, always with the same unsettling rhythm. I decided to talk to Victor again. It was late at night, and the knocks were louder than ever. I knocked on his door and waited. When he finally opened it, he looked more tired and worn out than before. "Victor, seriously, you don't hear these knocks? It's driving me crazy," I insisted. He frowned and with a harsh tone replied, "I've already told you I don't hear anything, Lucas. Stop waking me up at this hour. I need to rest." His response and attitude left me disconcerted. The friendly and helpful Victor seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone distant and hostile. I began to question if he was hiding something or if there was something more sinister going on. His indifference to the disturbing noises increased the mystery and tension. The knocks continued night after night, and my ability to ignore them was running out. The frequency and volume increased, making it impossible to have a good night's sleep. I began to suffer from insomnia, and my anxiety grew with each sleepless night. The sound of the knock seemed to get louder and closer, as if it were moving through the walls, following me. Meanwhile, Victor became increasingly reclusive. He stopped greeting me in the hallway and avoided any kind of interaction. When I met him by chance, he was always in a hurry, with sunken eyes and a grim expression. He always seemed to be looking over his shoulder, as if he were being watched or followed. His change in behavior was disturbing and fueled my suspicions. I tried to focus on work to distract my mind, but the lack of sleep and constant discomfort made it hard to concentrate. The knocks became an obsession. I spent hours awake, listening and trying to decipher some pattern in the sounds. Each knock was like a blow to my mental state, eroding my sanity little by little. I reached the point of starting to question my own reality. Was I really hearing these knocks, or was it just a product of my tired imagination? I began to doubt myself, but every time the knocks echoed through the walls, the certainty that something was wrong reaffirmed itself. The knocks were real, and I needed to find out what was happening. Victor's attitude only added to the mystery. His initial indifference turned into open hostility. One night, during one of my desperate attempts to confront him again, he stared at me with a fierce look and said, "Lucas, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't hear anything, and I don't want to talk about it anymore. Leave me alone." His voice was filled with irritation and perhaps fear. I started to wonder if Victor was as disturbed as I was, but for some reason, he didn't want to admit or deal with it. Or maybe he knew more than he was willing to reveal. The mystery of the knocks and Victor's change in behavior were taking over my mind, and I knew something more sinister was happening. The persistent knocks wouldn't leave me alone. I decided that I needed to act to discover the source of the noises. First, I looked for logical explanations. I called a plumber to check if there was something wrong with the pipes. The professional inspected everything thoroughly, but found nothing abnormal. No loose pipes, no leaks. Apparently, everything was in perfect condition. Next, I considered the possibility that it could be a structural problem. I contacted the building manager and requested an inspection of the walls. Again, nothing unusual was found. No cracks, no signs of wear that could explain the knocks. It was as if the building was mocking me, hiding its secrets in the shadows. By this time, my frustration was at its peak. The sleepless nights and constant tension were driving me to the brink of despair. Victor, for his part, maintained his indifferent stance. He even suggested that maybe I was causing the knocks myself, unconsciously, while sleeping. This left me perplexed and even more determined to uncover the truth. I turned over every corner of my apartment, looking for any clue, but everything seemed normal. The feeling of helplessness grew inside me as the tension mounted. I was trapped in a vicious cycle where every attempt to solve the mystery resulted in failure, fueling my despair even more. The persistent knocks continued to haunt me night after night. I decided that I could no longer endure this situation without a direct confrontation. It was late at night when I heard the noises again. I got out of bed, determined, and went to Victor's door. I knocked hard, my patience already exhausted. I waited a few moments until he finally opened the door. His face clearly showed the displeasure of being interrupted. "Victor, I can't take these knocks anymore," I said, trying to stay calm. You need to come to my apartment and hear for yourself. This can't go on like this." He looked at me with a mix of irritation and tiredness. "Lucas, I've already told you that I don't hear anything, but if it will give you peace, I'll go." I invited him into my apartment, guiding him to the living room, where the sound of the knocks was loudest. "Stay quiet and listen," I asked, as we both focused on the tense silence of the night. And then, the knocks began again, rhythmic and relentless. "Did you hear that?" I asked, hoping for finally some confirmation from him. Victor frowned, but didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the wall, and for a moment, he seemed as disturbed as I was. "Lucas, this is insanity," he finally said, his voice carrying a strange mix of irritation and fear. "I don't know what you want from me. Maybe you're imagining things." Frustration took over me. "Victor, you have to be hearing this. It's not possible that I'm making it up." The tension in the air was palpable, and Victor seemed even more uneasy. "Enough, Lucas," he said, turning to leave. "I can't help you. Go see a psychiatrist. Maybe he can." Before I could respond, something changed in Victor. His eyes grew cold, his expression hardened. Without warning, he pulled a knife from inside his coat and lunged at me with alarming speed. "You want the truth, Lucas? I'll give you the truth," he shouted, his eyes now filled with uncontrolled fury. Survival instinct took over me. I managed to dodge the first blow, but fear and adrenaline made me clumsy. The blade gleamed under the dim light of the room as he tried to reach me again. I managed to grab a chair and used it as a shield, blocking Victor's attacks. "Victor, what are you doing? Are you crazy?" I shouted, trying to reach anything I could use to defend myself. But he was relentless, as if an invisible force was controlling him. Keeping a safe distance between us was a hard task. Suddenly he stumbled, and the knife fell from his hand. I took the opportunity to push him away, making him hit the wall. Victor was on the ground, panting, and the knife lay beside him. As I tried to catch my breath, something unimaginable began to happen. From the wall where the knocks had been coming, a figure started to emerge. At first, it looked like a shadow, but quickly took on a more solid form. The creature was tall and gaunt, with grey skin that seemed to pulsate. Its eyes were black voids, lifeless but full of an indescribable malevolence. There was a supernatural aura around it, a presence that made the air feel cold and dense. Its hands were long and skeletal, ending in sharp claws that glinted in the dim light of the apartment. I was paralyzed with terror, unable to process what I was seeing. Victor, still on the floor, began to scream, a sound of pure horror. The creature moved quickly, with a supernatural agility, and grabbed him. He tried to fight, but it was useless. The creature's claws dug into him, and his screams echoed through the room. I knew I had to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. Each movement of the creature seemed to be a direct blow to my sanity. With one last scream of agony, Victor was pulled into the wall, disappearing into the darkness along with the creature. When I finally managed to move, I fell to the floor, trembling. The shock and terror were overwhelming. The room was in absolute silence, the absence of the knocks now more frightening than when they started. All that remained was the trail of blood and the memory of Victor's screams. I knew I needed to get out of there, but my legs felt like lead. I struggled to stand, each movement a battle against the paralyzing fear. I needed to survive, to understand what had happened. But mainly, I needed to leave that cursed place. After the fight and the screams, I waited for someone to knock on my door. I expected the neighbors, alarmed by all the noise, or even the police, to come and check what was happening. But nothing happened. The building seemed to be plunged into a surreal silence, as if it were complicit in the terror I had just witnessed. Still in shock, I sat on the couch, waiting for my mind to process everything. The fatigue and exhaustion finally took over me. Without the strength to fight sleep, I fell asleep, still terrified by the images of the creature and Victor being taken. I woke up the next day with a foggy mind and an aching body. The reality of what had happened the night before hit me like a punch in the stomach. I needed to clean the apartment, erase the traces of the traumatic event. Each movement was a struggle against exhaustion, and fear. I grabbed a bucket, water, and cleaning products and began scrubbing the floor, removing the blood and any sign that Victor had been there. As I cleaned, the worry of being arrested began to take hold of me. What if someone discovered that Victor was missing? How would I explain his absence without seeming like a suspect? My mind raced with scenarios of police interrogations and trials. I had no proof of what had really happened, only my testimony, which sounded insane. What if they accused me of something I didn't do? Panic began to set in, making each movement more urgent. Days passed, and strangely, no one seemed to notice Victor's absence. There were no police knocking at my door, no neighbors asking about him. It was as if Victor had never existed, which disturbed me deeply. The illusion of normalcy was almost as frightening as the events I had witnessed. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare where reality and the supernatural blurred. Each drop of blood seemed to whisper horrible memories, but I continued, determined to restore some sense of normalcy. The stains didn't come off easily, and the cleaning process seemed endless. The apartment, once a place of hope and a new beginning, was now a scene of terror and pain. I needed a change. I decided that the only way to move forward was to relocate. I found a new apartment in another neighborhood, far from the nightmare I had lived. I packed my things quickly, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety as I left that place behind. The new apartment was simple, but it had an aura of new hope. As I unpacked, I tried to convince myself that I was starting anew, that the horrors of the past would stay behind. The first few nights in the new apartment were quiet, but the silence brought a sense of unease. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that everything was in the past. However, on the third night, while I was lying in bed, I heard a familiar sound. Knocks, soft at first, but unmistakable. My heart raced. I got up slowly, trying to locate the source of the sound. The knocks were coming from the wall next to the bed, rhythmic and insistent, exactly like before. I felt a chill run down my spine. The feeling of helplessness returned with full force. The terror had followed me,